All right, so the Cleveland Browns surprised a lot of people in the 2021 NFL Draft because they chose not to take a defensive end with any picks, not just the first round, any picks. They didn't take a single one. And I think the reason why a lot of people are surprised is not a whole lot of people actually know about some of these guys on the roster. Or if they do know, maybe they don't have a complete understanding of how good some of these guys could potentially be. So what I want to do here today is I want to talk about this defensive end this defensive end room, rather, and talk about how some of these guys can impact the Browns this season. So I could sit here all day and tell you how great Myles Garrett is. It's going to change nothing. Everybody knows that. I mean, I think Myles Garrett this season is really set to make that MVP caliber run like we've been expecting. And I think he had a chance to do that, not last season, but the year before, because of how good he started off. Well, he started off great last season too, but I think the Mason Rudolph incident really derailed him. And so Myles Garrett's kind of been really, really good, but at the same time, there's a certain group of the fan base that has been a little bit disappointed. So last season, Myles Garrett had 13 sacks, which was third in the league. He had 4 forced fumbles. And if you remember last season at the beginning, it seemed like every single game Myles Garrett was getting a forced fumble. And it really wasn't if he was going to get one, it was when. And I think because of him getting COVID and whatnot, it really derailed his season. And yeah, he could have had an MVP level season last year, but because of his issues, you see the clips and you see the camera cut to the sideline, and Myles Garrett is just looks like he got done running a marathon. And it's clearly not training with him because, I mean, for the love of God, look at him. But it just really derailed his season. So that's pretty much it with Myles Garrett. I don't need to get into him anymore. We all know who he is, what he's going to be, obviously. So, but these other guys, it gets a little bit interesting because the Browns passed up on some other free agent options. There's plenty of options. It was just kind of how much money were they willing to spend. There was guys in the division with like Bud Dupree, and the guy out of Cincinnati whose name I can't remember, who I wanted. You know who I'm talking about. But anyway, so there was the in-division guys. There was some guys outside of the division, like Trey Hendrickson. But they ended up signing Jadeveon Clowney. And I was on the record. I thought Jadeveon Clowney should have signed with the Browns last offseason. Like, I don't understand why this took so long to get done with Clowney. I always thought it was a good fit for him in particular. And now that he's here, let's talk about how he could have an impact as far as the number 2 outside of Myles Garrett. So Jadeveon Clowney, if you haven't seen him on social media, and I'll try to include the picture if I can, he's working his butt off to get in the absolute best shape he can be. And it seems like he's not going through the motions, which is a lot of the complaints that people have when it comes to Clowney. It seems like he's just kind of there. Like he's not actually putting in the effort. He's just going through the motions. He's just there to be there because he's getting paid. It does not seem that way with him this offseason. He looks absolutely shredded. He looks really lean in particular. And the thing with Clowney is, yes, he was the number 1 overall pick. He's not your typical defensive end, because when people look at defensive ends, they say, okay, pass rushers. It's a pass rushing league. You got to have these Nick Bosas of the world who you take at the top of the draft to rush the passer. And obviously you see how good Nick Bosa is. Those guys really affect the game. Jadeveon Clowney is a little bit different. His number 1 skill set is run defense. That's what he's really best at. And with Clowney, he was top 10 in run defense from 2015 to 2019. So for 4 years straight, top 10 in run defense. So that's clearly his skill set. And with Myles Garrett, he can do both, but he's your pass rusher. That's the guy who you want getting in the quarterback's face, getting sacks, with Jadeveon Clowney, he gets pressure. Like, I don't want you to think he's not getting pressure. But the issue is he never seems to get home. Now that he's playing opposite of Myles Garrett, I think he's going to get home a few times, but it's also going to give Myles some extra sacks himself. Because if you get your hands in the quarterback's face, either one of two things. Either they're going to get the ball out quicker or they're going to hold on to it longer. And with the Browns secondary being revamped how it has been, I think a lot of times the quarterback's going to hold on to the ball a little bit longer versus getting rid of it quicker. That's just my 2 cents. I think that's what could end up happening a lot this season. Now, your better quarterbacks obviously are going to find ways to get rid of it and whatnot, and that's a lot to do with coaching more than quarterback. But I think with Jadeveon Clowney, if he can just get there, get pressure, Myles Garrett can do the rest. So I think the addition of Jadeveon Clowney is really more about the run defense than it is an actual pass rush itself. And you say, well, what do you mean? Because we still need pass rushers. Okay, let's talk about more guys on this list. Takk McKinley was signed to the Cleveland Browns this offseason. He was a free agent, former first-round pick to the Atlanta Falcons, had a really good rookie year. I think he had a really good second year, too, if I'm not mistaken. But he's kind of disappointed in a lot of ways. But I think people are writing him off a little bit too soon. So Takk McKinley, along with Jadeveon Clowney, and I'll include the picture with him if I remember, is really focusing on getting in the best shape of his life heading into this season. And Takk McKinley is going to be the guy that you're going to bring in specifically for pass rush. He can get the job done there. He's very quick. He's got great hands. He's got a great first move. I'd encourage you to go watch his tape. He's kind of, I don't want to say similar to Bud Dupree, but I think in the way that Dupree kind of got off the edge, I think there's some similarities there. That could just be me throwing out a name, but I think Takk McKinley, when it comes to pass rush in particular, is going to be very good in that role because you're not asking him to be the number 2. You're asking him to come in specific situations where it's a long third down or you need to get a sack, get pressure, and that's what he can do. And the same thing I talked about with Clowney, it's not as much about getting the sack, it's getting in the quarterback's face. And Takk McKinley can certainly get a quarterback uncomfortable. That's the number one thing on tape when I watch him is that. It's getting guys uncomfortable, forcing them to move around in the pocket. And sure, some quarterbacks are great at that and great in controlling those situations, but there's some quarterbacks who crumble and panic. And I think you even saw that with Baker Mayfield a little bit his second year. So having a guy like that in Takk McKinley who can do that job in particular is really good to have. So I really do like that signing. He's a guy that the Browns are betting on when it comes to, this low risk, high reward kind of signing. And I think it's going to be really beneficial for him and also for the Browns having him in this role. So the next guy, to me, is the most interesting guy on this list, and that's Curtis Weaver. People have completely written him off and forgot about him. Curtis Weaver is a very, very interesting situation here. So he's 6'2", 265 pounds. A lot of people don't love his body type, and I think that hurts him. But as a prospect himself, he was one of the most productive pass rushers coming out of Boise State. He is incredible, okay? Just go watch his tape. Yes, it might have been against lower level talent. It might not have been against guys who are like Big Ten or SEC tackles, but go watch him. You can see on tape how he can translate in a lot of ways. He had 2 years of pass rush grades over 92.0. The only guy to do that other than him was Myles Garrett, okay? So clearly he's a very, very productive pass rusher. He had a 7-second 5-cone, or 3-cone rather. I don't know. I wrote that down weird. I think it's 3-cone. Yeah, it's 3-cone. But so he's got good speed. He's got good hands, good technique. His athleticism is a little bit questionable. That's kind of the thing that people talk about is really his body type and his athleticism. But he's got the technique down, and I think he's really in a situation now where he's going to be able to learn the defense. He's going to be a situational guy like some of these other guys, especially with Takk McKinley, and he's going to be able to have an impact. You can't really, you can teach good technique, but when it comes to already having a good foundation to start with, it's huge for a lot of these guys when it comes to playing time. So for Curtis Weaver, I think this is a guy to keep your eye on, potentially as a Jadeveon Clowney replacement. Listen, I know he's essentially a rookie, right? Because he got hurt last year. And that's a lot of high expectations to say you're going to be our number 2 eventually. But he has all the tools in his tool bag to get that job done. And I think when it comes to Curtis Weaver, it's really about actually executing it. Because we've seen it in college. We know what he can do in college. But this is the next level. And I think if he can do that, he's got a bright future with this team. And that goes the same for Takk McKinley. Both of these guys could potentially be long-term Browns, even maybe not as starters, but as your 2 and 3 guys who can rotate, come in, and make an impact. So the next guy on this list is a guy we know, Porter Gustin, right? Porter Gustin was a 5-star out of USC, sorry. And listen, he's kind of come on as of late, right? He made some flash plays every once in a while before, but I think last season, in the cleanup duty role, I think he made a really good impact. I think he worked well with Sheldon Richardson in particular. It seemed like every time he made a play, both of those guys were really close together. Now, that could just be coincidence, and obviously Sheldon Richardson isn't on the team anymore, but Porter Gustin always seemed to be a guy that never really gave up on the play. You know what I mean? So quarterbacks, when they move around in the pocket, a lot of them will step up as they're supposed to or move out in the pocket. When you watch Porter Gustin and some of the things he did this past season, he's never looking downfield necessarily as far as like, oh, well, who's, they catch it. He's always looking for the quarterback to go make the play. And yeah, sure, that might be a lazy take, some of y'all might say. But listen, that effort is a big thing. And what I talked about with Jadeveon Clowney, the questioning of his effort, Porter Gustin, you see the effort there. And he's always looking to make a play. So I think when it comes down to who's going to make the team in this defensive end room, I think they're going to keep 5. And I think this is the list you're going to see. We could be surprised because they do have some guys like Malik Jackson who's going to play D-tackle, but can also play those situational outside roles in some cases. So we'll see. They might only keep 4. I don't know. But I do expect them to keep 5, and I expect, obviously, Myles Garrett, Jadeveon Clowney to be the top 2. The Takk McKinley and Curtis Weaver battling for that number 3 is really going to be interesting to me because both of them are kind of similar in the pass rush situations. I think McKinley might have the edge just because of his experience. But Curtis Weaver, I think more towards the back half of the year, you could see coming in and playing a lot and making some key plays and making his presence known. I think you're going to see a lot of flashes from him this season. And then Porter Gustin, we know what he is. He's going to play a lot of special teams. But as your 4th or 5th guy, when it comes to cleanup or depth, he can get the job done. So I think the Browns' defensive end room is way, way better than last season, where you were really relying on guys who you didn't necessarily want to. Like Olivier Vernon, who's still out there, by the way. The Browns could look to bring him back if they want to. Say one of these guys gets hurt. Say a Jadeveon Clowney gets hurt. They could look to bring him back on a cheap deal. He should be healthy by playoffs, maybe. Hopefully sooner, but I think this defensive end room is actually pretty good, and I think it makes sense in a lot of ways as far as this season why they didn't go ahead and draft a defensive end. And I think a lot of it is more to do with who was actually there. Like, I don't think they had huge grades on some of these lower guys, and instead of forcing that pick, they went ahead and took a guy like a Richard LeCounte, who was a really good value at that point and could potentially work into a long-term plan as far as safety goes. And we'll talk about that later, but I think when you look at this room, it's not nearly as bad as some people are acting. And like I said, I think Takk McKinley and Curtis Weaver could really surprise you. And I think if Jadeveon Clowney stays healthy, a motivated Jadeveon Clowney is something really dangerous. And all this helps Myles Garrett. And if Myles Garrett can be as good as he's been the last few years, having this extra help and having a great secondary is only going to help him even more. So that's it for me. Let me know your thoughts on this defensive end room. What grade would you give it? I would, honestly, I'm going to give it a minus based on your first two guys. I think you know what they're going to be. Even Jadeveon Clowney, I think you know what he's going to be. It's just kind of him and his health is really the question. I think Takk McKinley and Curtis Weaver are the question marks, but those guys could really, really pan out. Gustin, he's your solid C+, B- guy who you can count on. So I think this defensive end room is actually really good. So let me know your thoughts, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.